Wonderful. Thank you everyone for being here. I wanted to start out with this welcome screen and a little bit of appreciative imagery, just to give you a taste of how images, even though these aren't hand-drawn visuals, can help warm up a crowd. And it's wonderful to see everyone's answers here. I love the diversity. I didn't realize that the pictures that I chose today would bring about so many different answers. These are beautiful. Hello and welcome to the Appreciative Inquiry and Visuals mini session. My name is Heather Leavitt Martinez, and I'm a certified Appreciative Inquiry facilitator and virtual practitioner. And I am honored to live and work on the ancestral lands of the Ute, Anasazi, and Pueblo elders, past, present, and future. And if you don't already know what native lands that you are residing on, I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat in case you're interested. I'd love to know where you're dialing in from and, just basically who is in the room. Awesome. And I'd also like you to share if you are a visual practitioner, facilitator, or something else. And if you can, share what that is. Awesome. So we're kind of all focused on the chat right now, which is not that exciting. So I'd like to show the power of visuals and how that can be even more interesting if we were to annotate this. And click that and go down to annotate. From there, you're going to see a stamp tool, and you can choose any of those stamp pieces. Could be a check mark, a heart, a star, and you can click on the actual map there, the slide that I'm sharing, and now that gives us a visual representation of who is in the Zoom room today. All right, so I did hide the names of the annotators, but if you chose an arrow, it will definitely put your name in it. Excellent. So it looks like we have a lot of people on the East Coast of the United States, some folks that are on the West Coast, and we have a few Europeans. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I am going to stop. I'm going to ask you to stop uh, for now annotating, and I'm going to have you annotate again in just a moment. I'm going to take a screenshot of that so that we have a copy, and I'm going to clear that out. And then I'm going to go to the next screen, and here's where we get to see who's in the room according to what we do. So again, you can use that annotation tool to choose if you're a visual practitioner, a facilitator, a trainer, or something else. Yep, great. So someone says project manager trainer. Good. Mary Taylor is saying a tech host. Thank you, Mary. Yes, Mary's here. I've made her a co-host today. If you have any technical issues, feel free to put that in the chat. And also, if you have any questions, because I am going to get to those burning questions in just a moment, I would love for you to please type 3 question marks in front of your question in the chat. That way, I won't miss it. And that gives me a visual cue. Now, if you're just answering some of my questions, then definitely just put those in the chat. But if you have a burning question, please put those 3 question marks. And then if I don't get to it right away, I'll get to it at the end. So this is great. So I just want you to notice that being able to see that visual helps us know who is in the actual room. And I want to take a picture of that so that we can see. Great. Thank you so much for participating in that. If I were in an in-person session, this might be something where I divide the room in different areas and have the people walk towards them, sort of a human geography, if you will. And it's just a great way to get data and a visual way to see, like I said, who is in the room. So thank you for participating in that. And if you had some trouble with it, that's okay. It was really just an exercise for you to be able to see that. Now, we have a packed agenda today, so let's get started. My plan is to keep this within about an hour. If I go over and you need to leave, I completely understand. This session is being recorded for your convenience, and I'll also stay for about 10 minutes afterwards to answer any additional questions, starting with the burning questions that you have today, and then getting to some of the pre-submitted questions from the Google form that many of you already filled out, and some right at the very last minute. So I've been copying them over and checking them out. So thank you for that. Now, what I'd love to do now is talk a little bit about the purpose, the process, and the payoff from today's session. So the purpose today is to learn how to use the appreciative inquiry process template to facilitate a discovery meeting conversation. You received access to this template in your welcome email, and if you don't have it, that is okay. I can put it in the chat, but you can also just grab a piece of paper and draw along with me. It's not super critical. Again, it's in that welcome email, but I will put that in the chat now so that you have it. No worries. It's super simple. In fact, you don't even have to draw today. No one's going to be looking at your work. I'm not going to be asking you to share it, so you don't have to worry about that. You can just take some notes. So there we go. So let's talk a little bit about what a discovery meeting is. So a discovery meeting is an opportunity for you to meet with a potential client to discuss their project and how you can support and together find ways to collaborate. My approach is that it's one of service, and so that I can model the way by demonstrating and facilitating the conversation so they can see my experience and experience me as what it would be like to work with an appreciative inquiry facilitator. And if you're not an experienced facilitator, that's okay. I created the AI process template when I wasn't even a facilitator. I was a graphic recorder, and at that time, I was looking for ways that could bring value with visuals and make meaning in the meetings that I was in. And so this template later became a facilitation tool that I now use every time I meet with new clients. Sometimes I share it with them, sometimes I use it just in my personal notes. So having this template as a guide has really saved me in a lot of situations where I didn't know how to keep the conversation on track, and I wasn't sure how to harvest the right information that was needed so that I can give the people that I was meeting with a sense of what my process was about. Okay, and so today, the process that we're going to go through today will be to learn about the 5 phases of the 5D appreciative inquiry cycle and how it pertains to a discovery meeting specifically. This visual template serves as a framework as you harvest the information you need to write, say, a statement of work or a proposal, and it shows your value by providing a partial solution in your very first meeting with the client. Now, the payoff is that you can leverage this tool in your next discovery meeting or even practice it in other types of meetings to help organize your thoughts and be more productive in your work. So today, rather than telling you about the benefits of combining appreciative inquiry and visuals, I'd rather that you experience it. And you can watch the video that I created for this course on YouTube. I believe I also put that in the welcome email. I'll also place that in the chat. And I'll follow up with an email after this session with a link to the recording and a formatted chat so you have all of these other resources as well. You can also learn more about appreciative inquiry by attending some of the other upcoming courses at the center. And a great self-study task would be to get familiar with the AI principles that I shared in the welcome email. So I'm going to share my actual desktop, the one down here, and this is where we're going to start drawing and writing together. So let me do that now. And here is that AI process template. Now, I'd like you to grab your favorite mark making tool and any colors that you feel comfortable working with. And again, if you don't have this handout, no worries, you can certainly draw along with me. And on this template, we have discover, dream, design, and deliver. And when I first learned appreciative inquiry, it was the 4D cycle. And now it's the 5D, with the very first step being define. So when I get ready to meet with a client, I do a little bit of prep work. I start by writing in the center part here, and maybe I'll put in the client's name, their mission, if I have it, their vision, the purpose of what I believe their meeting is going to be, maybe any goals that we may have discussed in emails or previous conversation. I may even go to their website and check out this information just to get a little bit of information from them. And then I may even put in the date of either the date that we're meeting so that I have a record of that, and maybe even the delivery date of the event or the project that we're working on. And any names that usually come up, I usually put a lot of this information in the upper left-hand corner just because it's sort of an opportunity. It's a space that I don't use for the rest of it. So I'm sort of working in a clockwise fashion. And I review any of the emails and notes from communications that we've previously had and just make notes here so that it's all in one place. I might even put some preliminary questions that I have that I'm curious about that I want to make sure that I get asked as well. And this is where most of that defining stage is going to happen prior to meeting with the client. And then when I meet, I begin confirming why they wanted to meet. And sometimes I'll ask what their high bars and their low bars are. Now, what's a high bar and what's a low bar? Well, this comes from my friend Muddy Schlegel. And let me get that in front of you because it's important to know what the desired outcome is in any session. And this is specifically for the actual discovery session. I want to know from folks what the high bar and the low bar is about. And that's what we want to have come out of the session today. Now, I'm going to ask you to take sort of so far you've been at a balcony view saying, okay, here's sort of how we would be working the meeting, but I want to give this a try and I'll model the way. And as I do, I want you to be thinking about what your high bars and low bars are in today's session. So the low bar would be what is the bare minimum of what you would like to learn? And your high bar would be, say, something that is nice to have or would exceed your expectation. And that's something that you are welcome to either put in the chat, or if you want, you can also type it right into the slide here, because I've had that for annotating. Now for me, my low bar is that I just want to cover the high level overview of my process and provide some ideas on how you can use visuals in the appreciative inquiry approach in running discovery meetings. So that's really just my low bar. That's just the basics. But my high bar is that you leave inspired and ready to implement one or more ideas that you gain from being here. And again, if you have a high bar or low bar, please put that in the chat, or you can put that on the actual slide. I'd love to see them. And so when I ask this of clients, I really am working that in. Usually the low bar is pretty met unless they have really high standards. And then I take that into consideration. But those high bars, this is where you get to either meet those high bars that they have or set some expectations. So in terms of being able to use this in the very first meeting with your client, I would say if this is a high stakes client, maybe practice it with a client that you've worked with or in a meeting with your coworkers before you try something that you may not feel so confident in. But if it is something that you want to try and you feel like, if it's just note taking using this template, then great, go for it. And I'd love to hear how it works for you. So feel free when you receive my follow-up email to let me know how it goes. Great. Nina's saying that our low bar is understanding of the connection between visuals and appreciative inquiry. I hope that I can do that for you. If not, I'd love to hear how you've made some of those connections yourself. And your high bar is to build a template of tools for visual impact. Now we are going to get into customized templates in November, so that's going to be important. But I think what you're going to see here are get some ideas just from some of the slides that I'm sharing and some of the examples that I'll share at the very end. That should inspire some possible templates for you as well. And then learn something new. I hope you do here, Nicola, and gain an idea of how to use visuals to help students discover, dream, and design. Absolutely. We're going to dive deeper into the actual questions that we're going to ask. I'm going to give you some sample questions today that I use in discovery meetings, but sometimes you have to get even more distinct about that. So thank you so much for sharing those with us. So let's go back to my desktop and let's focus again back onto your piece of paper that's in front of you so that we can really focus on the next step, which is discover. All right, so This is where I ask my very first appreciative inquiry question. In the discover phase, I'll say something to the effect of, tell me about your fill in the blank project, team, or organization. But specifically, I'll ask, tell me about the strengths of those working together on this project and initiative. And when we ask for those strengths, then you can start to write down what those are, because those are going to be the building blocks for your design. Knowing the strengths and skills and sometimes the motivations of those working on the project or the team that you'll be working with. Then I take notes in that discovery section. So I'm actually doing this sometimes in front of the client, sometimes really big, and sometimes just right in front of me. And then after they start working on that, so after they're talking about that, or if they feel a little bit stuck, I might also say, please share a recent accomplishment your team experienced by working together. Making it more concrete helps them put it into perspective. Like they might be like, I don't want to brag, or I don't want to talk, great about myself when I should be talking great about someone else. In this case, you're giving them a real example and to help them, encourage them. I want to hear the best of what you have to offer, because what we want to do is we want to ask questions that really help set the stage. I love this quote by David Cooper Ryder. We live in the world our questions create. And so the questions that we ask at this discovery stage really sets the tone for the discussion, and they get a sense of where you are coming from, because we want to get away from problem seeking and we want to start to shift more to possibility seeking. A lot of marketers, a lot of engineers, analysts, and folks, and even facilitators like to ask, okay, what's your problem? What's the problem? So they can try to solve the problem. But what happens is you tend to get more and more of that. We want to seek out those possibilities because we want to build a foundation from which to really grow and soar. So once you've asked a few of those, you might even ask what contributed to your collective success. So now they say, okay, they can start to identify how they work together. And that's really important. And notice that these three questions are really unconditionally positive questions. Again, they're not that problem seeking, they're that possibility seeking. And we get more into that in November. But let's jump over to the dream state. Now, I'll find a good place to transition, because once they start talking about these, sometimes it can be a little hard to get started, but then sometimes it can be hard to get them to stop. And so I'll transfer into the dream phase. And what I'm looking for here is, what is the ideal for the actual event? So now we've kind of talked conceptually or talked about the past. Now I want them to start to think about the future, the project or the session that we are planning for. And so I want to find out what their desired outcome is. So I may ask a question as simple as, what do you hope to achieve? And if that doesn't give it, like if they all of a sudden start switching, well, what we don't want is, then I might say, okay, how do you want your participants to feel? And what I'm listening for are those positive aspects of what they want. And simultaneously, I'm thinking of ways to help their participants leave feeling good about their participation in the session that we're about to co-design. So I'm literally, again, I'm writing down in this area the positive feelings and attributes that they are describing. So I want to jump back onto the dance floor. And so what do I mean when I say jumping from the dance floor to I talk about the balcony and the dance floor. I've said that a couple of times now, but let me talk a little bit to that and what that means. This is a concept, and I actually sometimes use this as a meeting principle at the beginning of a meeting, to say that we as participants can either be at the balcony taking sort of an overview, or we could be on the dance floor. And this is a concept by Ron Heifetz, the author of the book, The Practice of Adaptive Leadership. And so here I'd like you to be thinking about how you would like to incorporate appreciative inquiry and visuals into your work. Now, some of you have already done that, and some of you, this is a whole lot of new language that you might not have heard before, and that's fine. But I want you to think beyond today. Think about your practice and your practical application. It may be that it would be nice to have a series of visual collaboration tools or that you can use in your facilitation, or perhaps you're great at customizing visual templates, but you want to learn more from the appreciative inquiry side to know what questions to ask. And so once the desired outcomes of my clients have been um, shared, then I like to move into design. But I also like to ask one more question just to really cement it down, because so far we've been talking about their feelings and the attributes that go into what we think would make a successful session. But I also like to create a little bit of data if I can. What were the measures of that success? Can you actually measure it? And I'm going to share closer to the end of the session today about how do we introduce this information that we're using in this chart. But having those measures of success, finding out from them why they were successful, is such great and important information. But let's jump back into the chart and let's look at design. Now, so far you've experienced both the balcony and the dance floor aspects of the define, the discover, and the dream. Now, the design is my favorite part, and here's where we spend most of the 3-week session in November. And I'll give you some examples of some of the templates that I've created in the past for clients. And these are a little bit larger than Post-it note size. These are a product that I use, and I can talk about that in our sessions later. But these are called Stickets, or they're by Neuland, and so there's a little bit larger. So I like to have a little bit larger, and I use sticky notes mainly when I'm in person, but I'm showing them here today. And so these are just a few templates that I created for a client at the beginning of the pandemic who was challenged with having to pivot their business in order to survive. And so at the beginning, we talked about where we were. So prior to the pandemic, who were our who were our clients, our partners, what were the goods and services that we did, and how did our clients and our partners reach us? So it was really about drawing some pictures on the past. And then we can start to draw our future. Where can we be? And so, without even trying to figure out the how, let's just figure out the what. What is it that we want in the future? And what is that going to look like online or in a digital world? And then we can start to break down, well, what are we going to have to leave behind? And what ideas do we need to be launched, or ideas need to be planted? And so we're talking now, what's that difference between the brick and mortar and the virtual world? And so these all became really larger graphics that we could harvest this information when we get to the session. And then again, people are like, wait a minute, back up. I want to talk about the seeds that we're planting and what do we need in order to grow in this new direction. And then we can start to get into that how. How are we going to build our new team? How is this going to affect the planet and the people? What are the new goods and services that we're going to offer? What are those tangibles, the no kidding things that we have to do in order to get there? And what are the values? Do we have the same values, or do we have new values that we need to be working from in order to get there? So these are really simple graphics that I just did some line drawings for you here, but imagine these were all just sketches right on my piece of paper or on the wall on a flip chart in front of the client. So maybe that'll give you a few more ideas. Now, when it comes to delivery, and some of you may have heard it in appreciative inquiry terms as destiny, and those two words are used sort of simultaneously. Now, you do have a choice between in-person, online, or hybrid, and the way you choose to deliver your visuals really depends on the format. You have the print version in front of you, and I'll also put a link in the chat at the end, or I'll share with you in a follow-up, an editable PowerPoint slide. And so that's something that you can use and to be able to use later on. Actually, I'll share my screen so that you can see what that looks like. Looks exactly like the one that you have now, with the exception is you'll notice that there's some text in here, and I've just put some placeholder text so that you can click on it and start to type right over it. So you can use a PowerPoint online, or if you're in a room, if it's being projected, to type up the answers to some of those questions that you've had. And that can help get get the group engaged into the AI process. But like I said, you can also keep all of this to yourself as well. Another way that I talk about, you can be working in person, or you could be working online. You've seen how I've used this document camera to show my actual desktop. Well, you can also use it, and hopefully I don't have really great lighting here. You can also use it to show a flip chart. Now, I could put a flip chart behind me, but I've got to tell you, I don't have a lot of room back here. So I'm going to point my camera that I just showed you to my wall piece here. There we go. All right, and so this is actually a portfolio. It's really big. So if you can see the scale here, it's really big, and it's a portfolio that I would draw up some sample templates, and I would take around when I was working in an agency to show some of my clients, and then I would actually put this plastic piece over it, and we would make edits so that they could actually see these are the kinds of conversations that we're designing and that we can customize to meet their desired outcomes. Another product that I have, or something that I use a lot of times online, is this is called a Wally. And what it does is you can actually has a roll of paper that I can have lots of different templates already set up, and then I can start to populate them on the paper in front of the camera. And so there's a couple of different ways that we could be working, right? We could be working analog in a digital world with actual markers on paper, or we could be working digitally using some of the tools that I'll share with you today. So I breezed through this pretty quickly. So before, I'm going to talk a little bit more about delivery, and then if you have any burning questions, please put those in the chat. But the last thing I'm thinking about between the design and the delivery phase is really, what are the logistical questions that I need to ask? How many people are going to be there? Who's going to take care of the lunch? Are there going to be any guest speakers? Things like that, location, those types of things. Then I'm going to get together my visual templates and possibly my statement of work, and also determining who does what by when, meaning what are the roles going to be. And all of those start to inform my proposal or my statement of work that I share with the client. All right, so that's really pretty much it. And I know that it's pretty high level, but I'm curious, are you leaving inspired and ready to implement one or more ideas that you've gained from being here today? Was your low bar met? Was your high bar met? I know I talked super, super fast, but I also want to be able to answer a lot of the questions. Oh, good. I'm glad to see people are inspired. Good. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. And yes, I will give you the editable PowerPoint. Yep. Excellent. So if you have any burning questions, please put them in the chat with 3 question marks. And in the meantime, I will go to the questions that people asked ahead of time. It looks like even a few more popped in. I don't think since we've been on the call, but at the very, very last minute. So I'm going to go through and make sure that I can see that. Great. Okay. Okay, so I just had a really good one come in at the last minute, and I'm going to save that one for last. Okay, let's do the burning questions first. A logistical question. Oh, wait. Here we go. Deborah, are you going to talk about a bit about the November class that you'd mentioned? Yes, I can talk about that, and I'll also put a link in the follow-up email so that you can see that. We are going to dive deeper into the dream, design, and deliver phases. In the dream and design, in the dream, here's where I'm going to give you, and we may even create some new templates to help us figure out how do we have those kinds of conversations, sort of like this process template that I have here. And then in the design phase, we're actually going to dig into what are some of the desired outcomes of some of your clients. Like, no kidding, if you have a client in mind and you want to apply this process, we're going to talk about some of those desired outcomes and what some of those templates could look like, so you can have the kind of conversations you want in order to meet those. And then we can get into the deliver phase. I can dive a little bit deeper into what's the technical part of being able to to deliver in a facilitation style, just like I showed you here today with, and I'm pointing over here because that's where my flip chart and my portfolio was, that and also the digital camera or just working with what you have or working in person. So how does that get delivered efficiently? So I can dive deeper into those kinds of questions. So hopefully that answers it. And again, I'll give you the links and you can read the description about that in November. It's 3 weeks and the sessions are about, I want to say 2 hours long for each of those. And there will be some pre-work and there will be some homework and a lot of sharing of some visual ideas, because the thing that I love to do the most is to create those customized templates, but then to also further customize them. And I think that we can all gain from sharing with each other what we're working on. So logistics questions. How do you get both of your cameras on you and the document working at the same time? Excellent question. So at the bottom of your screen, I don't think that I've given you ability to share. No, I have, but don't do it. I'm just going to say me only. But if you click that share screen button, what will come up is in the advanced section, there's a basic, advanced, and files. In the advanced section, you can say content from second camera. And that allows both for you to see my desktop, my physical desktop, and a picture of me, which some cases when I'm teaching, I just like people to be able to see my desktop, but when I'm facilitating, I want them to be able to see my face too. Even if I'm looking down at the desktop, it gives them the sense that there's a real person there working. So I hope that answered it. Let me know, Kelly, if you have more questions like that. Yeah, so the Wally. So some of you may know that I am a Neuland ambassador, which means I test and help design products for a German company called Neuland that make markers, um, different facilitation tools and flip charts and walls and things like that. And what I showed you before was called the Wally, and it's on what's called a lift buoy, which is it's not really hydraulic, but it kind of is, but it goes up and down, and it allows me to be able to bring my actual Wally, this device or this tool, into the space. Now, if I had more room, it would be way back and you'd be able to see it. But what's great about it, like I said before, is that I can scroll and have a lot of different charts or visuals already set up. This was from a lettering class that I taught. And so all of that is there. And I usually have it set up with my camera in another area and I just walk to it. And because I have this really long cable on my headset, my microphone just sort of travels with me. So hopefully that'll help. And great, Florence, thank you so much for sharing the link in the chat. And if any of you are interested in purchasing anything from Neuland, I can give you a 15% discount using my ambassador code. So I'll be sure to put that in the follow-up email as well. Thank you. And then can I recommend my favorite book or resource to learn from about appreciative inquiry? I'm so glad you asked that. I have a whole bunch here. I will tell you that first, I won't tell you my very favorite first, but the most inspirational book I think that I had read, and I believe this comes in a audiobook, I'm not sure, is Appreciative Inquiry, A Positive Revolution in Change. And this is by David Cooper Ryder and Diana Whitney. Now, I will say that I will take a picture of all of these and also put it in the follow-up. So you don't have to, or you can take a screenshot, but I will get this information to you. There's two other books that I really like for questions. Now, sometimes it's hard to know where to start. And so these two books are excellent. The Encyclopedia of Positive Questions and Appreciative Team Building is also positive questions to bring out the best in your team. So love these two books. But by far, my absolute favorite book about appreciative inquiry is Appreciative Inquiry, Change at the Speed of Imagination. And the reason why I love this is because it really takes traditional, and I apologize, Kelly, or anybody on the call from the Center of Appreciative Inquiry, but I guess it just like, it attracts the rebel in me because it takes traditional organizational development and puts it on its head. It says, this is the way it's normally been done. Here's what happens when you apply appreciative inquiry. And it's full of case studies that you can see I've taken lots of notes here. I got stickies all over the place. I'm sure that there's writing. I've even got drawings in terms of how just reading a couple of pages inspired me to create visuals and exercises that I could use in meetings. So I hope that's okay. That's my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for the Center of Appreciative Inquiry there. So those are some of my favorite books. Another book, and this is This is called Appreciative Sharing of Knowledge, Leveraging Knowledge Management for Strategic Change. Now, I'm really into strategic visioning and change, and so another really great book. Again, I'll be sure to put those in the follow-up. Yeah, so hopefully that answered your question, Lori. Super. Any other burning questions? You can put those in the chat. We've got a bunch that were asked in the form that was a part of your welcome pack or your welcome email. Okay, let me take a sip of water because I am getting pretty dry. That's a lot of talk. Okay, so first question, what is the best way to develop a visual vocabulary that will make recording or facilitating easier for me and more beneficial for an audience? I love this. However, I don't know the best way because that will vary for everyone, but I can share with you what has worked for me, and I'd like to invite any other visual practitioners that are on this call to share what's worked with them in the chat because this is a very personal journey. Visuals are, especially if you're new to drawing or like me, I wasn't new to drawing, but I had to really shift my fine art drawing to a drawing style that would work while capturing visuals. So early on in my career as a graphic recorder, I practiced all the commonly used icons and attended as many, they call them graphic jams, as I could. That's where someone, maybe everybody will write the different kinds of concepts or images that they want to learn how to draw. They put them in a big bucket, you pull it out, you say it, everybody draws it. So now you get to have a visual library of all the different ways to draw one type of topic or icon. And that helped build my visual library. But then I would custom design and prepare as much as I could for upcoming events. And the reason why I'm bent over here is I'm looking for some notes because since I saw this question ahead of time, I thought I'll give you some examples of what I did to prepare my visuals as an actual graphic recorder, but then also later on as a visual. So our actual notes all the way from, let's see if I got this right. These are, okay, so I've got lots of different things in here. This was from in 2020 at Yale University. I did a whole series of graphic recordings for a couple of days. And so what I would do is I went from, instead of creating icons, I would start to draw layouts. So imagine this is like a template. I'm not facilitating to this. These are guest speakers, but I know what they're going to be talking about to a certain extent, and I'm leaving space for the content, but I can almost pre-draw out some of the visuals so that I have it that way. Here's another example. Now, this is what I share with my advanced visual practitioners is that I have a card for every single graphic recording that I would do at, say, at an event, like a graphic recording event. And so I would have each one of these in front of me, and sometimes I would even write down what my color palette was going to be. So these are all ones that I did over the 2 to 3 day process. Now, on the plane, on the way there, I'm drawing different trees. I'm drawing just some different concepts, some questions, some topics that they were talking about that I just gathered from the agenda. This is a little hard to see, but this turned into like a two panel graphic recording. And then over time, from the very beginning, I was collecting all of the different color palettes that I've used. So this is something else. You don't have to do this, but as a graphic recorder, I had color palettes, I had icons. So this is where I started building my library of containers, drawings of people, which these are all pretty complicated drawings, so they would get a little bit more simplified or cartoony, starting to identify different colors so that I can show different skin and hair colors and having color palettes available for that. This little 5 people that I had here, I drew these 5 people in so many different configurations. Just having that in my back pocket as a reference has been really great. And then again, more charts. Just these are literally charts that I did, throughout the years as my job as a graphic recorder and as my job as a graphic facilitator. So some of these I was actually facilitating too. Yeah, great. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so after I built all of these, so that was when I was really a graphic recorder, I was rarely included in the discovery meetings and the design process. But as a visual facilitator, now I have the opportunity to create these custom templates and help design the facilitative process to support the conversations in order to meet those desired outcomes. So it's very much more purposeful. All right. Now, the next question that I have, and again, you can feel free to put questions in the chat. Next question, how do you make the shift with long-standing clients to incorporate more visuals? Are there any suggestions for how to use this with Mural or Miro? Excellent question, because when I first started, I was working again as a graphic designer at a leadership development company, and my role was set. It was very transactional, and I wasn't allowed in the room for the meetings. It was like, here's what we talked about in the meeting, make it look beautiful, get it done, here's how much time you have to get it done. And that was really hard because it was like, hold on a second, I've got questions. And it was like, no, the decisions were already being made. So what I did, because it was really hard for me to shift from that to a new way, and hopefully this can be used with long-standing clients as well, is I just started making sketch notes of the conversation. At that point, I hadn't developed the AI process template yet, but I was thinking about those things, and I had AI in the back of my mind, but I would just sketch note in the meetings, and then I would email it out in a follow-up email to everyone who was in the meeting. Hey, I made some sketch notes in case you want to use them to continue the conversation or to think about it later on. Well, that started to get really popular, but it didn't really create legs. I just then became the lady who drew during meetings, right? And so then I created a series of educational tools for my colleagues and for potential clients and to share with decision makers. And for me, I started with my manager so I could get her support. I didn't want her to think I was trying to create a job that didn't exist anymore, even though I was. And I asked what tools she felt would be helpful. I made videos, I made postcards that talked about what are the different things that I can do with visuals and how they can benefit different types of clients. I graphic recorded and videoed me drawing a story about the company. So if you have a long-standing client, maybe they have a really great history, or maybe they're rebranding and they want to tell their new story. If you have a way to draw some of those pictures and make a video, whether it's analog or digital, that's a great way for them to see, oh wow, we can use this somewhere else. It doesn't have to be pro bono, but it could be if they're a great client and you want to just have that experience. Those kinds of videos got a lot of attention. And then I created a series of tools to help my services. And I want to show you, this is on my website. And this I want to say I created it pretty early on. Let me share it here. And I want to warn you, this is a lot of information. This took me over a month to make, but this is an infographic. And this shows all of the things that I wanted to do with visuals: graphic facilitation, graphic recording, custom templates, custom graphics and chart work, like templates and chart work that we would do that's really customized for different things. Prezi presentations, those were really popular at the time. Keep in mind, I did this in 2014. And scribe videos, that's where I was making those videos digitally to share stories. And all of this information below here talks about on the left here, these little pies are sort of the people that it would take, like how many people does it take to build these things? Who's involved and what's their time commitment? The impact, maybe we don't impact a lot of people, but we impact them deeply. Or whereas a scribe video, maybe we don't impact them deeply, but we impact a lot of people. On the left here, these are mainly pull types of information, meaning we're harvesting this information from the client or from the people that have the knowledge, or we're pushing information. This is really about change management or marketing. And then at the bottom, this is like the frequency. How frequently do you use these tools? Now, I don't know where I got this idea other than I had so much information that I wanted to share about visuals that I wanted to put it all in one place. And so I created this infographic. And Lori, I got to say, I wish I had half the energy that I did when I created this because it's really quite complicated, but it's got great data behind it. And it helps set the expectations of not only what can people do with the visuals, but it's going to take more than just me. And this is where I love to collaborate with facilitators and say, okay, I'll do the visual part, you do the facilitation part, let's divvy it up because it's hard to do both. So again, keep in mind that took me a while. Now, as far as Mural and Miro, there are so many templates already out there. And what I do is I like to take several of them and build one workspace and maybe have like an area where we're having a warm up. Maybe it's the appreciative visuals or something like that, where I have a couple of places where we gather some information and then we can have some full on templates. And so the great thing about those tools is that you can work asynchronously too. So you can build these online tools and then you can say, okay, have a look at it before the meeting, you can work on it during the meeting, and then you can have some, they can continue the process after the meeting. So hopefully that helps. And then how to integrate visuals without taking away from the eye-to-eye connection. This is so critical for those of you who are facilitators and you don't want to lose that, because when you have to turn around and write something, you've just taken up some time and space. Now, the advantage of somebody writing something down is that everyone gets to see what was written down. The people that said it feel heard. And so it's really important. But knowing your purpose and the role in the purpose of the meeting is really important. So if your role is to ensure connection with the participants, then go light on the visuals. Draw up templates beforehand. You can also co-facilitate with a visual practitioner so you can focus on the people and someone else is drawing. 4 or 5 more
So I
questions.
know.
Okay, so someone asked how to include participants in visualizing. Now, I'm not quite sure what this means, so I'm going to try to answer it the best I can. I love drawing shared visions, meaning I put the markers in the hands of the people that are in the room. And there are many fabulous facilitated processes that you can design or get trained in to help participants visualize. A great way to start a meeting or get people to storytell was like the welcome screen that I shared. For in person meetings, you can cover an entire table with images that people can look at, sort through, and choose to talk about their stories. And it's the questions that you ask that will help them visualize. So ask them future possible solutions, or what if you were to see something in the future, what image stands out to you, or what's a possible solution for something. That's a great way for them to use visuals without actually having to draw something. But I will say that if someone is ever having trouble in a session and they might be using their hands a lot to try to make connections or explain something, I'll say, do you mind drawing that out? And give them a fresh piece of paper. You'd be surprised at how many people are like, oh, good, I get to draw it. Now, they'll get halfway through the drawing and get a little nervous sometimes, but that's okay. Just want you to know that if they do feel comfortable doing that, and I've actually been graphic recording, and I've had speakers draw on the actual graphic recording with me just to show or reflect an idea or concept that they're having a hard time speaking to. So if that didn't answer the question about how do you help participants visualize or help them in visualizing, let me know. Some of the things that I talked about in terms of you can get trained in, the Grove consultants out of San Francisco have a wonderful strategic visioning program that I'm trained in that's excellent. And they have a lot of future vision exercises where you can use those charts to help small groups get together and create a vision together. All right, next question. How do you use appreciative inquiry to support hard conversations, and what role do visuals play in that? So this can be tough, and I don't know what you mean by hard conversations. Is that hard I'm going to give you some examples of what I experienced as hard, but of course, I'm sure we all have different hard conversations that we have to apply, that we need to apply this to, or that we're working with. So I personally always like to start a conversation, even if we know it's going to be heavy, with an unconditionally positive question. Even if it seems a little bit out of place, the reason is because I want the participants in the room to know where I'm coming from and what the possibilities are, and that they have a strong foundation from which to have breakthrough conversations. For instance, I used to work as a contractor for the intelligence community. Everything there was a hard conversation, whether it was time sensitive, mission driven, They have to make decisions or ensuring that the culture of the organization supported those who had to make hard decisions. So, one common practice that I had was to get them to share their recent accomplishments. Now, not only does this help them celebrate what they've accomplished, but they start to remember the resilience and their connection with one another that helped them to be successful no matter the challenge. Now, I can't share with you the accomplishments charts that I did in that scenario because those were all either classified or, client work, but I will share this one that I did recently with an arts center that's just coming out of the pandemic. They had a thriving theater department. They were not thriving before the pandemic, but somehow were able to get some money to be able to build up their programs so that when the pandemic was over, they could really start to shine. And so I asked the director, and what you're seeing in the middle here, this is supposed to be an iceberg. Again, very pretty simple drawing, but in the middle here, in the blue part, this was the information that she shared with me in terms of what they had accomplished. I had her present the accomplishments that they had gone through during the pandemic. And then I came in and I said, "What else did you accomplish?" And the participants in the room, I started to write in real time. So the middle part was already done before the meeting. And around the outside in real time is what I captured as they were speaking. And they loved being able to see what they'd done together. And then I said, the very end, I said, "What was it that enabled you to do this?" So everything that we're seeing above the waterline is above the surface, right? So this is everything that they um, had put forth. But what wouldn't the public know? What was it that really kept you going? And so you'll see there communication, collaboration, commitment, passion, flexibility, innovation to shift the organization. And then you see these funny little symbols here, the MI, SK, and BE is mindsets, skill sets, and behaviors. And this came from the book Learn, Lead, Lift by Wendy Ryan. And I love being able to say, do we have the mindsets, the skill sets, and the behaviors? In this case, we could also say, we could also attribute them to appreciative inquiry attributes, right? The principles of appreciative inquiry, but it's really giving them some language around that. So these accomplishments, this is again a great way to set the tone, but then you've got to really give space to those harder conversations. So don't think that the whole conversation is going to be like that, but now you've got this platform in order to be able to grow from. And so hopefully that is a little bit helpful to see how you can start that out. But just know that you still have to keep going with that. So maybe Lorraine, you're saying, so the accomplishments are work related. Do you ever allow for general or personal accomplishments? Oh, absolutely. Personal wins. Let's brag about ourselves and each other because this is the time to do it. And I think that's a great way to do that too. The reason why I like to do it with teams, especially if they're getting ready to have a hard conversation, is that if they realize that they've gone through something that was a challenge from them before, or they succeeded in some way, they can talk about what worked there, what helped them be that way. And when they can say, if we got through that, then I think we can get through this next hard part as well. Then I would probably put down the markers and have that hard conversation. Really give them an opportunity to speak to what they need to get out, unpack their backpack, address the things that they need to address so that it's not just, washed over in any way. You want to give them that space. And then to follow it up would be a great opportunity to be listening to this for them in case they don't hear it and say, okay, as you were sharing your stories, here's what I heard gave you the strength to get through it, through the process, or here's where I've noticed that you have strengths that you can apply to getting there. Not trying to wash over it, but to just bring to the surface. Can you see yourself doing this again, or in what ways can you use what you've done in the past to be able to get through this challenging time? So again, not trying to sugarcoat anything, but to give them something and to create that foundation for them before you begin. So hopefully, yeah, that was helpful. Good. On a personal note, do you still make time for your fine art processes while embracing your facilitating? Thank you, Janice. I appreciate you asking that. Yes and no. Of course, it's different. I've also learned because I practice flow. If any of you are familiar with the flow state as it's described by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I know how to be really productive in small increments of time. So I do have a studio downtown away from my house. I've moved all my art things there, and I do go there quite frequently to make art. So thank you for asking. And yes, that's what gives me life affirming. That's what affirms me, right? That gives me life force. So thank you for asking that. And then what resources are easily available since the current webinars are filled? And I'm sorry Kelly left so soon, but I will get back to whoever asked that. I'm a little curious. You might need to say more what webinar you were looking at that was filled, but I will check with the center and I'll follow up in an email any other webinars that aren't full. Um, but there are some really great in terms of the books that I shared with you. I would say maybe searching for podcasts. I listen to a lot of appreciative inquiry books in audio. So there's books out there. I just, because I'm a listener, I like to listen as well. And then I got a question, a very last question that was really challenging. In it was just asked in the Google Doc, what will be required of me to adopt an AI mindset and what challenges or obstacles will I face? Can I just sit with that for a moment and reflect back before I knew what AI was? And again, if you folks need to drop off, that's fine. But I do want to share the story. Before I even knew what AI was, I will say that my life was I was a hot mess and I wasn't quite sure to do with everything that was going on in or around me, emotionally, physically, everything. And I don't know, I can't even tell you how I came across it, but I remember listening to a book about AI. And the more I listened to it, it was the first thing that I had heard where I didn't think I know more than what they're talking about. It was like, I know what to do. I know and all of a sudden it hit me on a very deep level. I thought, I've got to learn more about this and I've got to learn how to apply this. And what happened was for a long time, just like any kind of habit, you kind of fall back into your beanbag chair of what's comfortable. But then I kept seeking more about appreciative inquiry. And as I learned about the principles, I started to think of how they could be applied. And some of the principles I'm like, not really applicable here. But then other ones were like, oh my gosh, this could be like the thing I focus every decision I make on. And so I kept listening to more appreciative inquiry books, read a lot of case studies. I actually developed the AI process for myself. And then when I went to Washington, D.C. to be part of the visioneering team that I helped build, it was a team of visual practitioners that worked for the intelligence community. Um, it was there that I had that AI process sheet in my portfolio and I took it to every single meeting. And it was like, it was a way for me to organize all of these complex things. I didn't know what they were talking about in a way that I could reflect it back to them. And so in that time, I think that the mindset shift was actually pretty easy for me because it was helping me along the way. But where the challenge was is I was working for analysts and engineers, and they were constantly talking about problems. And I was just like, oh, I have to shift this. I have to flip this. I have to reframe it. And it seemed like everything they said, I was reframing. And so that was the challenge. And now I think I've built this sort of internal, maybe it's just maybe it's just visceral for me now, but I have this little internal meter inside of me that when I hear the word problem, I'm like, did they really mean that? And then it's like I get into the how would I reframe that? And then now I've gotten so far ahead of it that it's sort of like I can almost I can almost predict the next five things they're going to say about their problems. So I can either choose to cut them off and get them to be thinking in an appreciative inquiry way. I don't have to say, we're going to think like appreciative inquiry people now. I'm actually just going to ask that question. Or it's almost like a game of chess. I can see where they're going, and I just have to listen to some of those words that they're saying, listening for those strengths that they have, and then reflect that back to them and say, how can we apply it to what you want? What is it that you really want? And that has been so fun and still so challenging. So, what I'm going to share with you also is a case study that I built when I applied for my facilitation certification. I wanted to show examples, some visual examples of that. And I want to say it's 13 pages, but I will share this in the follow up with you. And what you see here This graphic at the beginning was a graphic that I started building for my company full of engineers. And this was an actual conversation map. It was a handout that I gave everyone. I said, we're going to work through this AI process. And right away, I got arms folded, people saying, we don't want a new way of doing things. Just tell us how to do what we already do better. So this piece of paper just lied on their desks, and I still followed everything on it. And they were like, this is incredible. They just didn't read it to make the correlation. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you all of the different visuals and the case studies, the different job aids that I created. Again, how I've used this process template in different ways, and then just some other storytelling of how this has worked. Now, please be kind. This was before I learned anything about lettering. So you're seeing my raw flip charts before I learned any calligraphy or anything like that. Here are our accomplishments. I did that from the very beginning. It's been a very powerful tool. And this is actually an appreciative inquiry tool that they taught us at the center. And then just different ways that I've pulled it together. So I will share that in the follow-up as well. All right, what AI podcast do I recommend? So I don't know. I'd have to look for them. You know, I said that thinking there's a podcast about everything, but I would say just about any one would be great because if you're listening and you're hearing all that great uh, recommendations and tools about appreciative inquiry, that'd be wonderful. All right. Okay. I will tell you that there will be one more session before the November session. I believe it's at the end of October. And if you want to attend that, you can. The basic information is the same. The only thing that's going to be different are the questions that are at the end. And if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to answer them. And I'd love to hear how you're applying the process template in your next discovery meeting or any kind of meeting that you're in. So hopefully it's been as good of a guide for you as it has for me. So if there's no other questions, I'll sign off.